So firstly, people, are auditors kept aware and up to date of the latest cybercrime infiltrations and what can occur and how that can affect their audits? Then it's the process of doing their audit procedures and understanding how that may impact on it for material misstatement. And then the technology of understanding what tools and technology can be used for committing, fraud, but also for detecting, or at least being aware of, has the client undertaken a cyber security audit or cyber security review, so that the auditor can get some sort of satisfaction that the client is fairly mature in their systems and the protection of their systems for the audit.
Okay, thank you. I cut someone else off, sorry.
No, it was, I think it was me, Fran Maud. I'm a partner at PwC in the forensics team, and been an investigator for a number of years, and prior to that was an auditor. I'd agree with everything Roger said there. I think, the one area that you see increasing as a result of COVID as well is this sort of third-party targeting of businesses where you have a movement of people from offices to home working, which has required sort of system workarounds, which can only, if done quickly, weaken the resilience of those systems. And, one of the key methods that we see is around, this whole spear phishing idea, where someone targets you with a fairly benign looking attachment. They get onto the system. They then work their way around the system to understand who's who and work out the vulnerabilities, and then, effectively send a payment request or change payment details or whatever else to make sure money goes out of the business. I think one thing that isn't related to that point, a point that I wanted to make, was that when we talk about material fraud in the context of an audit, in my experience, that tends to be more around the accounting misstatement, and some of that we should think about the distinction between stuff that is an inconvenience and a cost to the business but not life-threatening, and then stuff that is material, because the two, in my experience, are very different in how you approach them, how you treat them, how you detect them, and whatever else. So just wanted to make that point as a contextual theme.
Yeah. And is it typically different technologies that you see leveraged for those two, like the distinction you've made between, manipulation of the financial statements, for example? Is it different technology being used for that, or just different techniques?
I think it's more the identity of the fraudster and what their objective is. So I think, in the sense of the external perpetrator, generally what they're trying to do is to get money into their own coffers from a third party, whereas where you see some of the larger material collapses, they often involve a level of dishonesty within the management of the business and a desire to manipulate the books and records to appear in a way that they aren't, and that can be through transactions that are recorded within the books and records, however well, or not recorded within the books and records, i.e. unrecorded liabilities. And the sort of theme around, the theme around what data can achieve in the sense of some of those. So we touched on some of the limitations of data and technology, but I'm sure we'll come on to some more of those as we go through the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Anne, excellent. The old-fashioned hand up. Anne's next, and then James.
That also works, right?
Excellent. It does work.
Yeah, so maybe I will briefly introduce myself. I'm Anne van Stralen. I'm from Maastricht University. I'm professor of accounting and assurance services. And as the past 4 years, I also served as the head of the chair of the departments of accounting and information management. But as of today, I have a successor, so I have a little bit more time, which is good. Yes, so I can also echo what, of course, I'm not working in practice, so, so for my insights are based on readings, both from reports from practitioners and also from academic research. But I think indeed one of the biggest challenges is cybersecurity, including data security in a virtual environment. Actually, in Maastricht at Christmas, we were hacked. I don't know whether this made the news, but yeah, so that was unbelievable how much this what this does to an organization. So you hear a lot about it, but when it affects your own organization, then you know what it means. So I think that is clearly one of the biggest challenges. And also there is this global economic crime and fraud survey. So I think Fran knows this very well, and because it is done by PwC, and the survey of 2020, where they highlight what are the top 4 types of fraud, and cyber crime is the second most important one. So I think this clearly presents many challenges. Then I think at the same time, and I think that was also hinted at in the outline that we received, is that essentially all the technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotic process automation, they can all also be used by the fraudsters. So they are being presented as possible solutions to discover the fraud, but at the same time they can also be used, and they are definitely not they definitely are not fraud proof, let's put it that way. Like artificial intelligence can be manipulated or learn through fraudulent behavior. Also blockchain has hacking ability. So that I think presents one of the biggest challenges. And I think also the cryptocurrencies, there's also some concern about that, so that these currencies are also not unreachable to hackers. I think also the Center of, I don't know whether we have a representative of the Center of Audit Quality. I think in the
we do.
Yes, okay, yeah. So you made also a very nice overview. So on in your report on the different technology risks that are currently out there. And I think one of the big things is, of course, if you're working, like was mentioned already, garbage in, garbage out. If you're working with unreliable data to begin with, well, then the outcome will also be unreliable. Or if your systems are not processing it in an accurate way, then the outcome will not be correct. Unauthorized access to data is clearly an issue. Manual interventions. So they also in that report give a very nice overview of all these technology risks that are out there. And then maybe to contribute one issue that I wanted to point out, because you seem to allude to the fact that some frauds are material and others are not. But typically what we always also teach to our students is, well, fraud is always material, because you're actually hitting the already hit or comes across fraud, then probably he's hitting the tip of the iceberg, and there's much more going on. And then I think that's also important to for sure.
Thanks, Anne. I think we talked about a little bit looking about fraud always being material was the last comment you were making. James, I think you had your hand up next if you wanted to comment, and then we'll come to you, Lucy, given that we've already had reference to the great document you've done. So we'll go to you after James.
Thank you, and hello everyone. maybe Anne made a reference to the top 4 types of frauds, but I guess I'm still trying to, in a very layman's way, just get my head around really what's in a few short words, what's the areas of exposure or perpetration that is or likely to be the trend, as it were, of today. And I'll illustrate, the ISA 240, the fraud standard, did quite a good job 20 years ago, really spotting and honing in on 2 areas, or 3 areas, actually: revenue recognition, the manipulation of the receivables and fictitious accounts. Secondly, the topside consolidation journal entries. That out of system type of process. And third, just simply management override. And then I think a little bit about today's technology. And if I had to, maybe my question is, if we had to spot areas of the financial statements or tactics that people are targeting, what would they be? And I in my mind, I imagine that there's a couple of areas. One is the fact that everyone is virtual. There are employees that may or may not never exist, but the ability to create persona, backgrounds, validation evidence, everything you need to validate an existing, this could be payroll fraud as a way of siphoning out funds. So the creation of fictitious employees. Similarly, the creation of fictitious transactions, individuals. And maybe the third area that I get thinking a little bit about is, and I've heard the phrase form jacking. And form jacking is where you take and you create invalid or fraudulent invoices, so that's expense padding. And then finally, and I do think you see more and more companies engaging in, as Anne mentioned, cryptocurrencies and that revenue stream in that space. And I wonder if that's, high for fraud. So really, I was just trying to move away, and I understand there's a number of techniques and technology enables, but do we have a sense of where they're targeting, the areas? Is it revenue recognition again? Is it employee or fictitious employees used to siphon out funds? Is it, again, expense padding, claim padding in the construction sector, the form jacking, or is it just an inability to really control and manage the cryptocurrency revenue stream? So that's kind of where I'm trying to, and I don't know if we have a sense of that. The Center for Audit Quality's report might say something, but Anne, your other 4 factors, you mentioned one, might elude them. But that's generally where if anyone had a sense of where they see schemes as a primary source being targeted within the financial statements. So it's an open question. I'm just trying to stimulate a little bit of a line of thought and expression. Welcome any views. Thank you.
I think I saw Fran's hand go up super quickly. Was that because you had, I had an answer, or?
No, I'd agree with everything James says there. I think, we from a practitioner's perspective, you do see all those themes, the ones you referred to in ISA 240 and the more recent ones in practice. And a sort of perhaps a slightly different lens to look through is the sort of globalized lens, and it's kind of the same thing as you were talking about, where you've got a bit of anonymity to the individual and who is the individual. And one of the themes that links those together that we've seen quite a lot of is around where you've got, global relationships between businesses that perhaps when ISA 240 came out weren't quite as sophisticated, and particularly around things like financing. So where you have joint venture relationships and financing arrangements around the sort of balance sheet side of accounts, which you seem to see a lot more of recently than you used to. Around, we look at Wirecard with the fictitious cash, alleged fictitious cash, as I understand. Who would have thought that 20 years ago somebody would be talking about cash as as an area that you could manipulate quite easily, but it's the kind of remoteness of the banking arrangements and whatever else that lead you into that area. And certainly the reason I've mentioned it is that from a practitioner's point of view, there are other cases that I'm aware of that aren't dissimilar. So, you know, I wonder whether there is something around knowing who stakeholders are and the precise arrangements. I mean, one of the things that we've seen within some Middle Eastern schemes is just the off-balance sheet liability type scenario where, you know, the use of checks and uncashed checks and things like that becomes more prevalent. So it's just an expansion of that theme, really.
Thanks, Fran. Lucy, I know you've been waiting.
No problem. And thanks to Anne for the shout out to our report. It's called Emerging Technologies, Risk and Auditors Focus, in case anyone is interested. And, you know, one of the points that I wanted to make with regard to, you know, the rise in cybercrime, whether it's business email compromises, phishing, ransomware, and the like, you know, typically in addition to the financial impact of these attacks, when the attacks are successful, there's oftentimes a weakness that's present in the company's controls. You know, a lot of these payments that are going out, whether it's, you know, fraudulent invoices or changing of a vendor's bank account information, shouldn't have happened, even though the employee or the personnel was misled to click on a link and have information accessed without authorization. And so, you know, this kind of goes back to Roger's point on like people and process, right? I think an area where companies are most vulnerable, like the company is only as strong as its weakest link. A lot of these external threats or threat actors are targeting key personnel and process owners, whether it's finance, accounting, HR, people who have a lot of the confidential financial and personal data, whether that's bank account information, the payroll that was mentioned. So, you know, it is very critical for a company's control to, you know, prevent people who aren't privy to this information and get access to the sensitive data. And, you know, one other thing that I wanted to echo too was, you know, all of this has been exacerbated in the work from home environment. You know, I think Fran mentioned that earlier. And, you know, in the US and in many other parts of the world, we transformed to this remote work environment overnight without necessarily being prepared. So companies are now using a lot of untested applications to facilitate this remote work and work from home, whether it's using video conferencing, you know, web applications, internal chatbots, mobile applications for data reporting, and all these other tools for teams to enable companies to collaborate in this, you know, teleworking environment. And so there's a lot of areas there for businesses to be increasingly exposed and vulnerable if security is not prioritized before deploying and even internally developing these types of applications. And the last thing too, you know, I'll just add is you know, I think in the US at least we've seen social media becoming an increasing risk too, whether, you know, I think TikTok is all over the news for having security issues. But at the same time, you know, one example is earlier, probably a few months ago, or even more recent than that, when the celebrities, including Barack Obama's Twitter accounts, were hacked, and they had asked, you know, people to pay them on Venmo. And, you know, anyone who had made those types of payments, their information is likely compromised. And, you know, whether it's on the dark web or somewhere else that's available for other people's purchase and access, you know, this could apply to companies as well. So I think with the pervasiveness of, you know, these new channels of communication, new tools and technology, there's more and more exposure for organizations.
I always learn something new on these calls. I'm learning all sorts of things. It kind of scares me and thinks maybe I should just switch everything off and disconnect totally, but that's not going to happen. Anything else on this topic before? I'm just watching the clock to make sure we have time. I know we might not spend a lot of time talking about the technology being used by auditors, because there's probably more people in our group who want to talk about the third slide, which is around technology used in forensic audits as well. I think we can probably access what a lot of the audit firms are doing if we run out of time. Anything else on this first bunch of questions people wanted to cover off?
Fiona, it's Roger here. I might just quickly respond to James that the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Global Fraud Study 2020 gives a really good, it's a 2-yearly survey that's been going on for many decades, and it really does give a good insight into, and it doesn't seem to change, that financial statement fraud is the highest median loss but the least likely to occur. Asset misappropriation is the lowest median loss but the most likely to occur, with accounts payable fraud, accounts receivable fraud, payroll fraud, asset theft, and then corruption is about in the middle. So, that study, even though it's fresh each 2 years, it comes up with similar data about the perpetrations, and that the technologies are really just enablers to commit the same type of frauds that have been going on for many, many years.
Well, thanks, Roger. That's actually helpful, and it links back to what you were saying as well, Lucy, when you're talking about the different types of applications. It's still doing the same thing. It's stealing cash, or it's, manipulating a Twitter account to be able to get cash. So to your point, Roger, the types of frauds are not necessarily changing, but the way they do it and the technology they're using to enable it is different. Okay.
And I think also, especially at the business e-commerce. So in e-commerce, we have more and more e-commerce, and even more now with the corona pandemic. And I think there are many fraud risks in e-commerce. So yeah, that's another example.
Imran, did you want to jump in there?
Yes, not in response to Anne's comment, but just some other comments. Good afternoon, everybody. I work at a regulator. I live in South Africa, which is a developing country, and in the context of fraud is a very high-risk country. And so my perspectives may not be globally relevant. They may only be partly relevant. And I want to make 3 or 4 quick points that may be relevant to this slide and the other slides, as I may drop off shortly from the call. The first is that I think that technology being used to perpetrate fraud, we see it as a function nowadays of being able of the industries in which there are monopolies or oligopolies. Previously, people had to caucus in a room to be able to commit those frauds. Technology now allows that to happen digitally without the presence of happening. So this is a new kind of fraud. The second one is technology fraud due to the lack of regulation. I'm always intrigued by the preoccupation with the dark web. There are many pieces of technology that are wide in the open, but are not regulated. And regulators haven't caught up with it. And that gap leaves huge scope for fraud. The third one is perhaps, again, a developing nation perspective, and that is technology fraud due to public goods being provided by private companies. Where the state is failing and not delivering, private companies step into that void. The traditional controls of the state then disappear, and private company incentives and other incentives may lead to fraud. And the last point is, I am confident that much of our discussion, even at the IAASB and in my own organization about fraud, comes from our greater awareness of fraud triggered by social media awareness. That there was a time when you read one newspaper a day and all you got to see was the one fraud that newspaper enjoyed carrying and made a meal of. And now you get news from all sources, all of whom think that the bit that they know about fraud is very newsy. And so you hear all about it. So just to offer those sort of perspectives. I'm not sure which slide they belong to, but I wanted to add that to the discussion. Great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Imran. Apologies if you do have to drop off. We'll catch you up, I'm sure, at the next board meeting with what we learned today. So we've just jumped to the third slide, thanks Bev, which is I just wanted to get some perspectives given who we've got on the group and pick your brains at the moment around the technology that is being used in forensic auditors, but also an opportunity to also ask, is there anything else that we should be thinking about as an IAASB? If we have time, we'll go back to the technologies auditors are using, but as I said, we can access the auditors pretty easily, so I'd much rather spend the time we have talking about the sorts of technology that the forensic auditors are using. So I know Roger and Fran, you're both forensic auditors, so who would like to kick us off? No pressure.
Can I go first, Roger?
Sure. Go for it, Fran.
Cheers, thanks. I mean, there's a bit of context. I think that it's quite interesting. One of the things we haven't heard about the forensic audit compared to the normal audit is just the difference in potential sort of breadth and depth. I think we often as forensic auditors have a sort of a kernel of an idea that something might not be quite right, so you sort of know where you're looking from the outset. That's not always the case, but often the case, and that sort of right from the word go sort of changes your outlook in where you're looking and what you're going to look at. So you're often looking at say a particular area of the accounts or a particular set of whistleblower allegations, and then you sort of use the toolkit to design what you're going to look at to try and find the answer and prove, as Roger said earlier on, the sort of the facts around that, and the sort of the toolkit is partly technology driven, but partly more sort of what you might call old-fashioned skills of looking at documents and talking to people. And in the context of the conversation on technology, I don't want to lose sight of those, because often, in my experience, the technology gets you to what you're going to look at, but then there isn't a data held record of what the actual that tells you the full story behind that specific transaction. So you might have, let's say, for example, a journal that's labeled accrued income. That's kind of all you know from the data, but you might then have to work out who posted it, what the circumstances behind it were, et cetera, et cetera. But the sort of technology toolkit seems to us is around sort of what we would call, we've heard about it earlier on in this session, like unstructured and structured data. So the structured data is around data analytics, and there are two main different sort of technologies, I suppose, that we would use around that. There's the sort of query-based technologies, where using your experience and sort of coding effectively, you design procedures that get you to an answer around a specific hypothesis. So give me all transactions that look like this. And then there's a newer sort of more machine learning based approach, which has to be tailored towards, in my experience, a particular business and set of circumstances. There are sort of out of the box packages that get you somewhere down that journey, but they basically tell you how transactions differ from other transactions within the books and records. So you can use those to sort of point you in anomaly areas. So that might be picking up things like the time the journal was posted, or who posted it, or which account it went to, which direction it was going, those sorts of things, and they're very useful. I think, going back to that point I made earlier, they then get you to a point, but you often have to go further with traditional techniques to sort of work out actually what was the story behind those transactions. And then the other area of technology that we use a lot is around communications, and that doesn't often get used in audits from my experience, although sometimes if there's a specific issue it can do. But that's around traditional comms reviews, so email review, chat review of internal chat mail, perhaps mobile phones, that kind of thing. And that often gets you historically to the real sort of core of what a specific set of facts and circumstances were about and who was directing them and who was involved, albeit there's always an unknown and you don't know whether people have taken those conversations offline or indeed, some are more sophisticated and don't use those communications in fraudulent matters. And then I suppose there's open source research as well, which is, just whatever else is on the web that can help you get to the bottom of a set of circumstances. But that's kind of the tech universe from a forensic audit perspective, as far as my perspective.
Thanks, Fran. Roger?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. And yeah, to extend, totally agree with what Fran's saying. In essence, when we're talking technology used in forensic audit, the term forensic just means the ability for giving evidence in court. So it's generally about something that is suspected to be improper to get evidence to gather that. And there's a lot of overlap between standard technology data analytics and forensic audit data analytics. So, there's a range of analytic approaches of rule-based analytics, of anomaly detection analytics, predictive analytics, network or link analytics, and text analytics. And for example, with the overlap with all the tools are, you name it, there's so many great tools to use, whether it's standard, basic, good old Excel or ACL or IDEA or SAP, Power BI, Google, it goes on and on. Then I did want to mention that last element of text analytics. So there is one approach, and I'll just use one example of fraud triangle data analytics, where using forensic technology for email review like Nuix or Encase or others, and where legally permissible, to review and have a look through all the emails in the organisation to pluck out where motive, opportunity and rationalisation of the fraud triangle interconnect, where it could be the CFO talking to their financial controller, colluding to commit fraud. And so there's some of the techniques, I suppose, and the technologies used by way of example in doing forensic audit.
Can I ask a dumb question, Roger? So if I think about the example you've just given for text analytics, where there's an ability to look at the email traffic, motive, opportunity, rationalisation, and you're looking at conversations between two individuals, be it CFO, deputy CFO, is it a little bit like what I would consider, say, more traditional data analytics that we use on external audits, where what that does is it can identify a population of things you then need to go and do more work on. It's not automatically able to say, yep, there's definitely some kind of collusion going on here. It's a matter of, this looks a bit funny. It's pulled out some keywords that we wouldn't expect these two individuals to be talking about, therefore go do more work. Or is it more sophisticated than that?
No, you're spot on, Fiona. So like most data analytics, they're red flags, aren't they? So they're red flags to say, these are anomalies, these don't look right. Now let's go and investigate further to see if there's a plausible business explanation for it, or if there's fraud. And an example is, a very simple example is the destination bank account of a vendor is the same as an employee. But then you suddenly investigate and find out that for everybody's expenses, they're recorded as a vendor. And so there's a match between the employee salary destination bank account and the vendor bank account. And it just explains that anomaly.
Right.
And I think it's worth saying as well that there's a sort of sector-based usefulness angle to this as well. And in sectors that are used to being monitored more intensively, the use of these sorts of communication methods, you see less, red flags, and the usefulness degrades to an investigator over time. I think certain sectors where the ability to monitor email or retrospectively look at email is less well known, then you're more likely to have a smoking gun. But over the time I've been doing this sort of stuff, the ability to hit on smoking guns, becomes more difficult. Whether people are largely, I think, because people aren't using comms to the same degree as they used to. I mean, you used to get massively, and you still do in certain cases, but massively overt trails of communications that effectively, bang to rights and the individual, and that's a lot rarer because of the public knowledge around the sorts of tools and sort of areas of evidence that are available to the forensic auditor.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Anyone else comments on this area or anything else you wanted to raise?
Could I raise one last question?
Okay. Oh, everyone wants to talk. I'm going to go Lucy first, then Roger, then Anne, because that's how I've got you sitting on my screen. So Lucy, go.
All right. Thank you. I was just going to add, so, right. So modern software such as, Power BI, Tableau, ClickData, I think these have all been mentioned by Roger and Fran. They do a great job of connecting these large data sets with relatively ease these days, and they continue to evolve. So, while these technologies are evolving and we blend, machine learning and AI capabilities into these programs, it's kind of a caution to, posing as a problem if people who are not machine learning experts but become highly reliant on these technologies, if they become, feel qualified to implement them because they're very familiar, and it's, there's a lot of, free courses or more accessible ways to become acquainted with these technologies. And I think this also applies to the companies. What I'll say is, companies are also using technology to implement their own monitoring programs, and for them and auditors as well, is the key is not to drown in everything that's out there. One tool won't necessarily address all frauds, and technology alone is not going to keep companies protected or deter all types of frauds. So, as companies are teaming with internal and external partners more than ever to help, with their fraud prevention, fraud risk assessment programs, there are areas to enhance these and to continuously feed back the results into existing programs will help with more effectively detecting fraud.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. Roger?
Yeah, Fiona, just quickly, I've also, I think it's going back to my people, process and technology. It's interesting from the people perspective too, that sometimes data analytics comes up with anomalies.
Sorry?
And without using professional skepticism, the auditor may accept an answer from a CFO and just assume that it's not a problem, rather than be sort of a little bit more attuned to the interview techniques of potential deception, and then not using the professional skepticism to that extent to follow it through. And there's been obviously a lot of corporate collapses and large frauds that no doubt audit would have picked up strong red flags early, but for some reason they were sort of brushed over or convinced that everything was okay.
So that to me sounds like there's always going to be a need for humans to eyeball somebody and ask the question. Oh, that's good. I'm not going to be made redundant by a computer. Thanks, Roger.
No.
Thank you. And Anne, I think you had comments you wanted to add as well.
No, I just wanted to comment on everything that was already mentioned, and I just wanted to share that in one of my course, Assurance Services and Audit Analytics, I invited a former PhD student who works at Forensic at PwC, and she gave a talk on forensic in my class, and essentially the students, they were super excited to hear and listen about all the techniques that forensic auditors are actually currently using